bad situation for Ukraine in Pokrovsk, where now they're turning to what they're calling special forces to try to hold the city, as even The Guardian is reporting that Russian troops are moving in a pincer-like manner, as they call it, with hundreds, if not thousands, of Russian troops breaking down the lines.
Well, first of all, I have to say I'm right now in the United States, but even when I travel to Russia, I'm in Moscow. I'm not on the front lines. So it's, you're a victim of the data that you receive. Ray is one of the guys who, has been consistent in saying the best way to learn about a leader or about a nation is to listen to them over time. And there are patterns that develop, patterns of behavior, how leaders speak to people. Do they lie? When they lie? How do they lie? And I've been applying that to Vladimir Putin. And I'm not going to say here and say he's perfect, but Vladimir Putin, when he speaks to the Russian people, is honest. That's my experience. He doesn't straight out lie to them. Is he capable of, softening a message or, softening a blow or overemphasizing a point? Sure. All politicians do that. But he doesn't straight out lie to the Russian people. And so when Vladimir Putin, and understand also that when Gerasimov, the chief of staff of the armed forces, commander in chief of the Russian armed forces, military commander in chief, when he makes a presentation to the president, that presentation has likely been drafted and a copy sent to presidential administration, reviewed. The president gets pre-briefed on these points. So nothing's going to take him by surprise. So when Putin rolled in to have this meeting with Gerasimov, and Gerasimov gave him the reports about Kupiansk being effectively surrounded and Pokrovsk being effectively surrounded, 31 battalions of Ukrainian troops being effectively surrounded and now subject to elimination. Putin echoed this and supported this and embraced this. These are big statements that can be made, and frankly speaking, they could be relatively refuted if they weren't true. So I tend to believe the Russians, because over the course of this conflict, the Russians have been far more honest and open than the Ukrainians, who have been, propagandized from the very beginning. The Ukrainians are fighting very hard. There's no doubt about that. But their war goes through a information warfare filter run by the British and the United States. Kupiansk is surrounded. The Ukrainians right now are desperately trying to break in and break out, and they're being slaughtered by the Russians. Pokrovsk is effectively surrounded. The Russians are clearing out the pocket. The Ukrainians were forced to do this propaganda exercise where two, I believed, UH-60 aircraft are flown in at very low level, and they disgorged, 11 or so special forces operators who were going to clear some villages and clear the way and make it possible for the counterattack to succeed. The insert was monitored by Russian drones, who then documented how they killed every single one of these people. And yet the Western headlines, they show this because this is what the British do. The British planned this operation to be this major imagery-based thing. Helicopters penetrating the Russian lines. Russians have no air defense, apparently. These brave special forces guys, oh, geez, Budanov, the leader, he's there at the front directing it. And they show a photograph of him bravely marching forward, directing the troops. It turns out, however, that photograph was taken 100 kilometers away in the city of Pavlograd because people looked at the building, noticed certain identifiable features, and matched it to the actual place where the photograph was taken. It's all fake. I mean, everything's fake except the dead Ukrainians. And that's what's happening here. But the most important thing that most people don't pick up on is that up and down the line, there's at least 50 similar encirclements taking place of a smaller nature, because this is how the battlefield has evolved. With the Russians, with the Ukrainians picking a point where they stand, they say, this is where we fight. And for all the people to move forward inch by inch by inch, you do know that since 2014, the Ukrainians have turned that area in Donetsk into the single most fortified piece of land on the planet. I mean, they have dug in, all this stuff. There's no army in the world without the use of nuclear weapons that could do what the Russians are doing right now. All right, ask the Israelis when they go up against Hezbollah's defenses in southern Lebanon. When they get up in the hills and the Hezbollah boys come out and knock them in the nose, that's the fight that's going on. In the Israeli army, the vaunted Israeli army, gets stopped at hill number 1. All right, the Russians have actually fought through these towns, and the Ukrainians dig into the towns. They put human hostages in the basement, making it impossible for the Russians to actually drop the building. So the Russians have to come in and then evacuate the humans and then assault through. Look at the Battle of Mariupol and what really happened there with the Azov bastards that slaughtered civilians. This is what the Russians are doing, and they're winning. But now the Russians are getting to the point where they've achieved dominance across the battlefield. The Ukrainians are still there in large numbers fighting, but the Russians get them to commit to a strong point. Then the Russians do a pincer around it. And the Ukrainians have the choice to withdraw to the next fortified position they prepared in the rear, and then the Russians push forward, or they hold and they die. This is why the Ukrainians are losing 2,500 to 3,000 men a day. 2,500 to 3,000 men a day. That's real numbers, guys. And we in the West just pretend it's not happening. Or we do what the British told people to do. Flip it. Take the Ukrainian numbers and say, that's what we're doing to the Russians. But it ain't happening, guys. The Russians aren't doing the human wave tactics that you think about. Every piece of this, the Ukrainians are just running crude propaganda. I've been to Russia. I've talked to the leaders. Look, I'm not the world's greatest interrogator, but I spent 7 years getting them to tell me the truth. And I know when somebody's lying. I can tell. And I know when people are uncomfortable. I've done it a long time. And when I look the Russians in the eyes, I see honest men speaking back. First of all, their answers are very honest because I get direct answers from people about losses, about the difficulty of the fight, about logistical difficulties. The Russians aren't saying this is easy. Every Russian I've talked to says this is the hardest thing in the world. Those Ukrainian SOBs are putting up a hell of a fight, but we're winning. We're beating them. And I believe them. I look at the Ukrainians. They're just liars, straight up liars. This is a propaganda exercise, unparalleled. And history will show it to be such. It will show it to be such. It's a tragedy what's going on right now. But, Donald Trump has basically said, we're going to let them fight it out. Europe is going to continue to provide as much financial and material support as possible. And the end result is the Russians will kill every Ukrainian necessary for this war to end. And that is a tragedy because this means that hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians are going to die because Donald Trump doesn't have the courage to tell Europe to back off and tell the Ukrainians it's over.
Putin appears in fatigues, and he's briefed by Gerasimov and the general staff. And the first thing he says is, look, we've got these cauldrons where we have Ukrainian troops surrounded, 5,000 here, 5,500 here. We don't want to kill them. I know some of you guys want to kill them, but we want to offer them POW status. And so here's my offer. We're willing to encourage them to do that. And we want to let journalists, Western journalists, as well as other in there, if the Ukrainians will permit that for just 5, 6, 7 hours, just to see that this is real, this is a cauldron, and we don't want to kill these people. What happened? Well, the Ukrainians, of course, said no. Well, why did Putin do that? Well, number one, it was a terrific political propaganda, if you will, move. But number two, it's a human thing. These guys don't need to be killed. They could be used profitably in the Ukrainian economy if they're not killed, okay? It makes good sense not to kill people if you don't have to. That was number one. Now, number two, he says, oh, by the way, brief me on this Budavyesnik. Tell me about this. And then Gerasimov and the others say, well, this is all scripted, of course. Putin said, now, how far that thing fly? Oh, 14,000 kilometers, Commander-in-Chief. Oh, well, and how long did it stay up there? Hours and hours, okay? So this was all staged. Now, why staged? Well, so that those Russians are saying, look, you're not going fast enough, Mr. Putin. And I think they're all Russians saying that, okay? You're not going fast enough. We're going to win this damn thing. And Putin is saying, look, we got it taken care of here. We've surrounded all these troops. We're hoping not to have to kill them, but if we have to, we will. And besides, we have these magical weapons. So what's the bottom line here? Well, the bottom line is that Scott is right. This guy tells the truth. And he's the most perspicacious. He's the most adroit politician that I have ever observed that I've been around for a while, okay? What can I say that I don't like about Putin? Well, I found something. The photo of him welcoming Jolani, the head chopper from Syria. Oh my God, says McGovern. You really have to do that, for God's sake? Oh, he's in the White House today. I guess, oh, well, I guess politics is politics. You have to extend your hand to the new ruler of Syria. But outside of that, in my view, we're damn lucky to have Vladimir Putin in charge of Russia. And we should realize that and, be adroit to be acceptable to his terms, because in the final analysis, and this is the big backdrop, he's won the war and he's willing to do, I think, make concessions that would enable Trump to be able to claim that this was a negotiated end, that Trump got something for Europe out of this. I think that's possible if Trump has any sense at all. The fly in the ointment, let's face it, is Trump, not Putin.
I've never been to Russia. I know you've been many times. I've had people on the show who have been many times, and they say, almost both, right? That Russians both think, there are some that believe that it's going too slow, and that there are others who understand exactly what Ray said. What is your assessment, though, of the approach now, given that Russia has this such overwhelming advantage? What prevents Russia from just cleaning this up?
Cleaning it up and it's over. What prevents it? Reality. First of all, I just take umbrage at anybody. We don't need to go over it again, but Gilbert Doctorow is out there pretending that there are people in Russia today who are dissatisfied with Vladimir Putin, and that they're really, really important people, and that Vladimir Putin better watch out because these people may actually do something. And then because Gilbert Doctorow may be taking money from MI6, his message is immediately parroted by the Telegraph that says Putin's afraid of a coup being planned in London by Mikhail Khodorkovsky. He's out there working with the businessmen in exile to do this, that, and the other thing. It's all crap. Okay, I've been to Russia. I'm telling you right now, the people that didn't like Putin left when the war started. Hundreds of thousands of them. They fled. And you know what the people in Russia said about these people? Good riddance. And you know what most of these people are doing right now? They want to go back because they realize that Russia's winning. And Russia wasn't as bad as they thought it was. They came to the West and said, holy cow, this is worse than we thought it would be. But there's a handful of people out there. These are like, trying to get grassroots reality about Iran by talking to the Iranian, diaspora in Los Angeles that fled the Shah in 1979. All right. They don't know anything about what's going on inside Iran. And Gilbert Doctorow doesn't know the damnedest thing about what's going inside in Russia today. What I do know is this: Vladimir Putin won the last election overwhelmingly during a wartime when Russia wasn't winning as convincingly as they're winning now. And the Russian people sent the signal, we trust you to finish the job. No time frame. The Russian people didn't say, you got to have it done by November. Got to have it done by this. Russian people said, you got this, boss. Finish the job. And what Putin has said all along is we will finish the job on our terms, and there's no clock attached to it. We will get this done. We are a results-based operation, not a calendar-driven operation. Unfortunately for we in the West, we're all calendar-driven. Trump puts artificial timelines out there. Everybody puts artificial timelines out there. And the Russians just say, no, we don't accept that. We're going to get this done. And the Russian people support this president. Now, are there people that would support even harsher actions? Sure. They're out there. They're in the minority. The majority of Russians trust the president to do the right thing, which means you don't overextend your military. Let's remember that the Ukrainians are in their fifth mobilization, sixth mobilization. I mean, I don't know. They have hundreds of thousands of men in uniform. They're losing, a couple thousand a day, but they still have a lot, and they're out there thumping heads and dragging them off. The Russians have done one mobilization, 300,000 in the fall of 2022. Since then, their military operates on a volunteer basis only. They're deployed military in the special military operation, sign a contract like we do. They call them contract soldiers. We call them volunteers. But what does everybody who joins the military today do? They sign a contract with the military. It's the same concept. And so they're able to recruit people in a time of war to do the fighting. And how many troops does Russia have deployed in the area? A little under 800,000. So basically, it's a one-to-one operation with the Russians and the Ukrainians on the front line. If you study warfare, you know that you need to carry out effective offensive operations 3-1. And if you're carrying out offensive operations against a heavily fortified position, 5-1, and you're going to lose a lot of guys. Well, the Russians aren't losing a lot of guys comparatively. They're assaulting the most heavily fortified positions known in the world, and they're beating the enemy at a 1-to-1 ratio. So because the kill ratio is 12-1, 15-1 in some cases, some people will say 36 to 39-1. I mean, that's what the dead body exchange rate is. I think that might be a little high, but the bottom line is normally when you're going to lose 3-1, meaning 3 Russians to 1 Ukrainian in an assault, here we have the Russians attacking the most heavily defended space in the world, and their kill ratio is 12-1, 15-1, 20-1. Why? Because they're winning. Because they're doing it their way. They're doing it with their algorithm. And this is a war of attrition. The job is to kill as many Ukrainians as possible, and they've done it. The Ukrainians are running out of manpower. Russia's not running out of manpower. The Ukrainians have to bring in weapons that NATO no longer has. Russia has actually drained NATO's arsenal. But the Germans just gave the Ukrainians 2 or 3 more Patriot batteries. They'll be dead by the month. Okay, that's how it works, guys. This war is over. When's it going to be over, Scott? You said 3 weeks. First of all, I didn't say 3 weeks. I said about a month. But that turned out to be wrong because I thought Russia was going to war. See, Russia's not at war. That's the other thing people don't get. This is a special military operation. If this was war, Russia would mobilize. Oh, and the biggest gift we gave Russia was compelling them to mobilize when they didn't want to, and suddenly finding out that about 60% of their mobilization facilities were run by corrupt individuals who hadn't stocked it properly. And what did the Russians do? They fixed everything. So today, if remember NATO wanted to go to war with Russia? Today, if Russia said, okay, we'll mobilize, they can get 5 million guys up in arms in a month and a half, fully equipped, fully armed, organized into divisions, corps, now with operational doctrine that reflects military reality. And they will roll over NATO like a hot knife through butter. What will NATO do? They can't. I told you, the Germans are too busy, pissing their pants and eating, donuts and schnitzel and pretzels. They don't want to fight. The Russians don't want to fight either. But the Russians now is more prepared for war than they have ever been, thanks to what the West has done here. Russia isn't just beating Ukraine. Russia is beating the collective West. Russia's outproducing NATO countries defense industry-wise 4-1. Russia's just a gas station with nuclear weapons. That's a pretty damn good gas station. They got a hell of a shop mart because they got everything you could want and more. But the other thing I would say for the people, what about the sanctions? What about this, that, and the other thing? If Russia is a gas station, then they're the best damn gas station in the world because that's what they do. Ask the Saudis every time they tried to have a little energy security crisis with the Russians and they went up with them, we're going to squeeze them out of the markets. What happened to the Saudis? They surrendered because Russia does this better. Russia produces oil cheaper than anybody else in the world. When we pump oil out of the ground here, the best we can get in Texas, $36 a barrel cost out of the ground. When oil's at $30 or $60 a barrel, you make $24 profit. Not enough. Russia pulls it out of the ground at $11, $12 a barrel. And when oil's at 60, that means they're making a profit of over $40 a barrel. That's more profit than we make. So they don't have to sell as much oil to make as much profit as we do. And now, because of what we've done with the sanctioning, oil prices are going up. which means Russians have to sell fewer barrels to make the same amount of money. The people who encourage sanctioning of Russian energy are the dumbest people in the world. You don't want to take on the biggest gas station in the world when you're driving a Humvee out of gas on a highway in the middle of nowhere. And that's where the West is right now.
Well, even though I'm a real old guy, I've learned a lot from people who are still older, just a year or two older. And one of them was Steve Cohen, Sovietologist, magnificent. Another is Jack Matlock, 10 years older than me, but still very much alive. Now, with respect to Steve Cohen, when I was going back to Russia after not having been there since 72, that's 1972, not 1872, all right? He said, look, Ray, there's a guy that's going to go to the same conference as you, and his name is Gil Doctorow. And I want you to meet him because he's among the best there is. PhD out of Columbia. He's worked in business in Russia for 30 years. You want to meet him and you want to learn from him just as if you've learned from me. Wow. Well, we did get to know each other quite well at that conference, and I've kept in touch with him ever since. You know, my attitude is that people go out of the box sometimes farther than they really intend to. But, you know, thinking out of the box is a good idea. And what I'm suggesting here is that what Gil has been saying is that Putin is feeling a lot of pressure of people saying, my God, get this damn thing over with. You have all the means, do it. OK. Now, is there any evidence of that? Well, Gil cites these very important and influential people on talk shows. But also, what's the logic of the thing? 8 days ago, I mentioned, Putin felt necessary to choreograph his in-fatigue's appearance at this command post to be reassured that the Ukrainians have been encircled, 10,500 of them, and that we have this Burevestnik that just won't quit. I mean, that was awkward. That was theater. Now, was that because he felt it necessary at this point in time to reassure people in Moscow that, you know, he's working on it and that, as he said specifically, he's putting the saving of Russian soldiers' lives as the primary purpose here and going slow? Well, I don't know, but in my view, it's an acceptable premise that, yeah, of course he feels pressure that he's not going so, and maybe that accounts for things like Burevestnik and the Poseidon, both of which, within days, he advertised very publicly, maybe to allay people, say, look, for God's sake, don't bother me. Look what we got here. So I just wanted to say that in my view, you let 100 flowers bloom. All kinds of stuff can happen. And we've all been wrong before about at least I've been very wrong before about very important things. But I think that people like Gil instill the kind of out of the box thinking that is salutary. And so I welcome that. And in terms of his qualifications, well, he's got unique qualifications in terms of language and culture and where he's been for most of his life now, which has been working in Russia or in Europe, working on Russian accounts for major corporations.